One of the great things about preaching a sermon is I get to pick the topic. One of the problems with preaching a sermon is I get to pick the topic.
Could you put the mic a little closer to you? Just a little bit.
How's that?
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. What I normally do on a topic, I pretend I'm going to preach a sermon to myself. So I usually pick a topic that something I need to work on personally. The assumption I make is you have to do the same thing. And that's what I want to talk a little bit this morning. Last month, Cheryl and I attended a 60th anniversary of my graduation from 8th grade. We had about 20 people showed up for it. And considering that everybody was my age, that's pretty good. But it brought back a lot of memories. I went to a parochial school. I have to put the emphasis on parochial. But at that time, we would never call it parochial because we were a Catholic school. St. Mary's School was on 18th Street, and the local public school was on 13th Street, which allowed students from both schools to pass each other on the way to school along Robb Avenue. The public school students were on the west side of the street, the Catholic students on the east side of the street, which was convenient. We could taunt each other. We called them publickers and they called us Catholicers. That was a problem that's, I think, Christianity has held for a long time. If you think back, even to the founding of the early church in the first century, we got into arguments and actually fights over the divinity of Jesus. Later on, we created something called a crusade so we could go out and kill Islam in the name of Jesus. We did the same thing later in the Middle Ages. The invention of the Inquisition. Later on, what really complicated the affair was the Reformation. That gave Catholics somebody to have a war with, and you didn't have to travel out of Europe to do it. When we came to North America, Christianity basically destroyed the Native American culture, giving them a choice to be baptized or to die. If you take a look at that type of a record, why would we want to be Christian? At this point, this sermon could talk about several different topics. We could talk about the religious influence that it's having on our democracy. That could be fun. We could discuss the various candidates' use of religion to get votes. Or just simply ask the question, should religion have anything to do with our election process? As tempting as it was, we're not going to talk about any of those. What I would like to talk about is how we face people with whom we disagree. And this is the area that, I basically have to take a look at myself. And I gave you that background on my background. That background, led me to become a priest. When I was still in grammar school, teacher would ask, and these were some nuns who would ask, how many people are going to be priests? Every boy in the class raised their hand. How many are going to be nuns? Every girl. By the time 8th grade, it had died down to about a half dozen of each. Those of us who hadn't reached puberty yet still raised our hand. But as I went to the seminary in high school and then to college and grad school, I was very fortunate. I ended up being assigned to go to St. John's Seminary in Little Rock. At that school, I had a life-changing experience. St. John's was not like any other seminary in the country. They expected us to learn to think on our own. And this is when I began to question. And I was encouraged to question. Very unusual in a Catholic seminary. There was a time I spent several years either as an atheist or an evangelical agnostic. I'm not sure which I was. But that was hanging out there. Atonement theology, to me, seemed like an abomination. The idea that God would send his son to die for my sins. See, today we would call that child abuse, if you think about it. Or the fact that I am such an important character that I had to have a God come down and save me. For me, that's great for my ego. But I don't think that's what we're about here. As my attitude changed, I began to discover that I was, you would probably understand this, a minority of the people I associated with. And a lot of my classmates in other seminaries, the Belleville Diocese, which I was a member, did not have seminaries of their own. And they farmed people out to St. Mary the Lake up in Mundelein, Illinois, St. Thomas in Denver, St. Meinrad over in Indiana, Conception, I think they're up in Kansas City area. That brought us back together during the holidays, and we would sit down and talk. And everybody stared at me like I had an eye in the middle of my forehead. What I began to do, I guess I became defensive. And when I discovered that if I began to look at other people who disagreed with me, they had to be idiots. And people who I thought should know better, I didn't mind telling them. But I also discovered that even if I didn't say that to them, my attitude conveyed that. I don't know if you've ever run into that. Somebody, I guess, we're a place where we ran into recently, we're just in the process of buying some new bedroom furniture. The salesman you're dealing with, what's his interest? Not you, although he tries to pretend it is. He wants to make a sale. And it's that attitude that you can pick up immediately, or at least I did. And I learned very well that other people can pick it up in me also. What I discovered with that attitude, and as I went on, I eventually left the priesthood, as you can tell, mainly for a lot of the reasons I just showed you here. But also I wanted to get married. But that attitude, I did have that. That's probably why Cheryl and I, this is our second marriage. If I was looking at my first wife a little bit negatively, that wears thin after a while. What I needed to do was a personal overhaul on myself. And I had one of those, quote, eureka moments when I realized that the people that I disagreed with all the time, that was me 50 years ago. I was that extremely conservative, young, idealistic, naive priest coming out of the seminary, ready to save the world. They didn't want to be saved, but I would not recognize that. I would not accept that. And that attitude needed to be changed. I'm trying to remember basically what I learned eventually, and Cheryl can testify to this, that relationships are how you connect with people. If I project a negative feeling about you, even though I'm up here with big smiles on my face and got this used car I want to sell you, you'll pick that up, right? And people do. When I discovered that what I was really criticizing was myself as a young man, that helped me begin to listen to others for what they were saying, not in order to argue with them when they got done talking. And that's the difficult thing to do. My personality, I like to be in control. That's why I like to be up here. I can control this microphone. But that is not what is going to help me have a relationship with anyone, especially with my wife. That's a big roadblock. And the first step, and this took me a long time, that, if you remember the title of the sermon, if you saw it in the bulletin, is respect. If I do not respect you, there's never going to be a relationship between me and you. And I think that is one issue that we need to spread is respect. We've got the grandest example of people who do not respect each other going on in Washington, D.C. But remember, we voted for these people. But that is really the point. We need to, at least personally, learn to respect each other and then live that. I hope that I have gotten over some of those issues and I have not projected that negative feelings on any of you. I figure it's kind of difficult since we agree on most things. But, if I do, I would hope you would tell me. But I think that is basically my sole purpose this morning, is just to convey that we need to respect each other. Thank you.
Amen.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Rev. Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.